Hi everyone, here's the Chemist once again, and in the last 2 weeks we began the second half of Gravity's Rainbow. We read a good chunk of part 3 in the zone. In this section we find some of the most unforgettable and significant scenes from the entire novel, some very disturbing passages, but also some crucial and key reflections. And I especially love the discussion that originated from the last video in this series 2 weeks ago. One commenter called Hudson Cleveland articulated the main point of Pynchon's worldview and Pynchon's poetics in the book as being about hope as opposed to control, and about the possibility that hope may arise even in a state of total control, where control seems almost inescapable. And I think that is definitely a key concern in Pynchon, and a key dynamics when it comes to Pynchon's plots and to Pynchon's reflections and to the evolution of Pynchon's characters. I think that is expressed most beautifully in the very first scene from the section we read in these last 2 weeks, where the Argentinian and the anarchists are on the submarine, and we see how they are discussing with that German director the idea of filming a film adaptation of Martin Fierro, this Argentinian epic about a gaucho who, in the first part of his story, he rebels against the Argentinian government and lives free. He's a supporter of the people, he defends the people, he lives in the Pampa, but then later in the second part he reverts back to Christianity, comes back into society, and basically sells out. And the reflection over there, which is put in very clear terms, that is one of the very clear sections that occasionally break the craziness of Gravity's Rainbow. The reflection over there is whether every gaucho eventually has to sell out, whether it's possible to live free and to live outside the boundaries of control, or whether control inevitably always wins. And with my good friend Hudson Cleveland, I discussed the fact that to me Gravity's Rainbow is hands down the bleakest novel in Pynchon's oeuvre. It seems to me that here Pynchon gives his characters only very limited space for hope and for freedom. Roger and Jessica being in love, so fuck the war. You know, these small sanctuaries of freedom, of being outside total control of the war, of the economic systems, of governments. Whereas elsewhere in his oeuvre, maybe his characters get a bit more space and there's a bit more optimism, especially in novels such as Against the Day. But then again, halfway through this section, I encountered a passage where this opposition, this key opposition at the heart of Pynchonian philosophy, is expressed in the clearest of terms. This passage comes from the section where Sawyer and Gustav's preferences in music are discussed, one of the best passages in the whole novel so far, where, you know, Sawyer is a fan of Rossini, Gustav prefers Beethoven. The pages are 522 and 23 in my edition. You'll find this passage I'm going to read in the description box. And Sawyer, as he is defending the music of Rossini, which is more uplifting, is more joyous than Beethoven's more epic and majestic tones, goes with Rossini. The whole point is that lovers always get together, isolation is overcome, and like it or not, that is the one great centripetal movement of the world. Through the machineries of greed, pettiness, and the abuse of power, love occurs. All that shit is transmuted to gold. The walls are breached, the balconies are scaled. This key reflection, which is repeated time and again throughout the novel as a recurring motive, is the one ray of light shining in the very thick darkness of Gravity's Rainbow, and makes it so much a novel of the 60s, as argued by so many scholars, especially Luke Herman and Steve Weisenberger's monograph on the novel Gravity's Rainbow, Domination and Freedom, connects the novel to ideas and key concepts in 1960s culture and philosophical thought. You know, for all that this is a complex and dark and cryptic novel, the key message at the end of it is all you need is love. It's that hippie idea all over again. Of course, explored in so many, you know, throughout all of its nuances and complicated in so many different ways, but the key concept is that one. In a different comment, Ben Shore commented on the way African characters are portrayed in the novel. In a text such as this that is so concerned with sex, African characters are usually shown as more aloof, almost otherworldly in the way they are detached from the world, in their very suicidal mission as we have come to see it. Especially in the course of this section, we see how the Schwarzkommando proceeds toward getting the Schwarzgerät, and Ben commented on the fact, and as always, of course, guys, if you feel I'm misinterpreting your comments, by all means, let me know in the comments below. Ben commented on the fact that this goes against common portraits at the time in the 1960s of African Americans as overly sexualized, and to me that's absolutely true. And also the fact that English, American, Western characters are shown as so constantly obsessed with sex is a way of commenting on these societies, because of course back then it was a key concept in the counterculture that all of these tensions, sexual tensions and sexual taboos which were kept hidden in society had to be freed instead, had to be discussed and addressed freely, and possibly this is one of the points that is not so easy to pick up these days, because our societies on that front at least are freer. But yeah, I think that's one of the very revolutionary concepts and ideas you find in Gravity's Rainbow and in postmodern works of this type. And of course, it's not like Pynchon is only addressing that idea in a joyous, impish sense of you'll be much freer once you're honest. Some of the tensions that are brought to the light and that rule the thoughts and the lives of these characters in Gravity's Rainbow are disgusting and terrible, and point at the self-destructive and violent streak inherent in humanity. That's one of the many reasons why this is such a pessimist and such a moving and disturbing novel. I guess how much of a pessimistic novel this is depends on how much space for freedom you read in the characters' decisions and in their story. But connected to this, other commenters, Dylan Clymer and David Lean, commented interestingly on the idea of the rocket as a symbol in the book, which the rocket, of course, is the key symbol in Gravity's Rainbow, is a symbol of pretty much everything. And at one point, in one crucial reflection, it is almost compared to a sort of Tower of Babel. And connected to this idea, we discussed together whether the rocket may necessarily be, whether it is absolutely and quintessentially a thing of evil, or whether it also has a positive side, whether it represents potential for good, most notably in the idea of rockets as means of escaping Earth, as means of reaching the moon, of expanding the frontiers of the world. I personally do not read too much optimism in that idea. That idea is central in one of the longest scenes in the section we read in the last 2 weeks, the one revolving around the story of Pöckler. Pöckler too, this German scientist, gets into rocket science and gets passionate about it because of his dream of reaching the moon, of using the rocket to go into space. But his wife Ilse from the beginning is very skeptical about that and knows that this type of dream is only going to be exploited in order for these instruments, for rockets, to be used as instruments of war. The story of Pöckler's life is especially crucial because it relates to me to one of, again, the key reflections in Pynchon's Hoover. I'm sure we discussed this already in past videos in this series. The fact that Pynchon is always concerned with showing the hidden costs of contemporary life, of life in general. The fact that maybe your wealth, maybe the conditions you live in are inevitably connected to other places in the world, that old postmodern mantra, everything is connected in the end, and to the fact that maybe your gain is directly connected to somebody else's suffering. And that is represented most clearly and most disturbingly in the image of Peenemünde, this German camp where the V2 rockets were assembled, and which has part of it, the Dora prisoners camp, which is very much a concentration camp. It's a place of immense suffering. It's described in a single paragraph, and it's one of the most moving and disturbing paragraphs in literature, the most moving paragraphs I've ever read. And Pöckler too realizes that he has been living and working so close to this place of suffering while still ignoring it. And we get that reflection on prisoner camps and labor camps too, on the fact that he knew about them, he had heard about them, but At the same time, he believed the government's official version that these were places of re-education, places where prisoners were given second chances. And I don't think that is necessarily Pynchon's indictment of the German people, of the German people's guilt when it comes to the Nazi regime's crimes. I think there's an element of that, but I think that beyond that, much more than, pointing the finger at a specific people or at a specific generation, what Pynchon is doing is showing how easy it is to believe grand narratives of this sort and to carry on with your life, with your individual small tragedies, and to ignore these things and just not think about them. This passage, the way Pöckler goes about assembling the rocket, developing the rocket, is all the more disturbing because we see this side of the thing. We see his professional dedication to this instrument he is building, how passionate he and his fellow scientists are about their creation, about this technological innovation. But at the same time, we have read part 1, Beyond the Zero, set in London, with virtues falling all over the place, and we have experienced directly the dreadful, terrible consequences of these tools, the suffering and death that originate from this innovation. In this sense, we are able to see how blind Pöckler is in creating these things and how easy it is for him, for his fellow scientists, to ignore what they are doing and to ignore the terrible consequences of the research they are leading. Very last paragraph of that section, that scene with Pöckler, where he gives his wedding ring to the woman in the prisoner's camp, is often quoted as among the most moving scenes in Gravity's Rainbow, one of the places where the novel's irony collapses and we get a deep human connection, and I absolutely agree, it's a beautiful and moving and terrible scene in so many ways. And let me reiterate once again that during my first read of the novel, I think I didn't even realize the full impact of that scene. I possibly kind of ignored it, or I couldn't really remember where it came from. That is to say, once again, that I'm realizing more and more how Gravity's Rainbow is one of those books that inevitably, for its very structure, you have to reread in order to appreciate fully. In my experience, the first read was good to get the shock value and get the confusion out of your system, but throughout this rereading you are able to appreciate all of these nuances and the huge emotional impact that is to be found in the novel. But by all means, I'm not trying to impose my experience on yours or on anybody else's. If you're reading it for the first time and having a great time and you're able to relate to the characters, by all means let me know, and it's good for you. It's really very possible that I simply, the first time I read it, maybe I wasn't truly ready, or maybe I wasn't dedicated to the experience enough. Last thing I'm going to say for this video is that it seems to me, it's getting more and more clear to me that each of the 3 parts we have been reading so far, part 1, part 2 and part 3, each has, I don't want to say its own vibe, because it seems to me like the atmosphere of the book is quite homogeneous, but at the same time the first part is largely set in London and mostly focuses on Slothrop 2, but even more on Pirate Prentice and Pointsman and Roger and Jessica. Part 2 mainly focuses on the casino, and here part 3 is largely focusing on Slothrop's wanderings through the zone. It seems to me like these 3 are rather separate parts, and each of these parts has a different focus. There's a level of independence in each part that I hadn't at all picked up during my first read. Let me know about your experience with this section of part 3, whether you're still engaged by the novel, whether you're struggling with it. 2 weeks from now I'll be discussing the last section of part 3, and then we'll only have the final part 4, Counterforce, left to discuss, and we'll be done with Gravity's Rainbow. I'll ask you maybe a bit later down the line whether the feeling, the idea stirs in you the feeling of dread, or oh my god, finally I'm done with this terrible novel. Let me know about your experience. Let me know whatever passes through your mind in the comments below. Thank you as always for watching, guys. In a second I'll put links to others of my videos on the screen, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys.